Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for your willingness to serve in these difficult positions. Well, I'm grateful to you for your families and the support they provided you. And I'm also grateful that both of you have taken the time to meet with me prior to this meeting. General Langle, I'd like to start with you. As we previously discussed earlier this year, the National Commission on the Future of the Army made some recommendations to Congress and to the Pentagon. And among those recommendations was a suggestion that the Army retain four Apache battalions in the National Guard for the purpose of retaining greater wartime capacity and adding to the depth that we have. And then the National Commission on the Structure of the Air Force recommended in 2014 that the Air Force should, quote, maintain operational capacity and capability and reduce stress on the active component by maintaining or increasing the end strength of the reserve components, particularly in traditional part-time reservists and guardsmen, while increasing regular, periodic, and predictable use of the Air Force Reserve and Air National Guard, close quote. So these reports and these suggestions seem to indicate that there is a greater role for the National Guard to play in peacetime missions and in wartime missions, especially as the Department of Defense is trying to cope with budget constraints. What's your assessment of how the National Guard has integrated and associated with active services over the last 15 years? How have you seen that change? And how do you think the Guard can be used in the near future to help mitigate against the difficult budgetary conditions in which the Department of Defense is operating?
Well, Senator, I think that I would start by saying I'm a huge proponent for the operational use of the National Guard. On the Air Force side, I would tell you that we are embedded, routinely, regularly deployed. The Air Force simply can't really do anything, continuous operations around the world or fight its war plans without integrating Air National Guard force structure across all of their MDSs in any mission set that they do. On the Army, the last 15 years of fighting wars American people have spent billions of dollars buying them good equipment, making them ready, making them training, giving them the discipline of the force generation model and now the sustained readiness model that is got the Army National Guard a very capable force that I believe has excess capacity to provide more regular and routine deployments. As I've heard General Milley testify and discuss recently in past, is associating constructs of his active components and reserve components, in my view, is a very good thing that's going to increase the readiness of the force and the availability of the force. Right now, we have about 10,000 Army National Guard soldiers deployed around the world. For 10 years of war, we had routinely 60,000 forces deployed around the world. So in my view, there's excess capacity now to take formations and deploy them regularly in concert with the Army, their requirements, the combatant commanders, that could, one, build a more ready and robust force in the Army National Guard, and two, perhaps, take some pressure off the Army to help them build readiness, as the Air Force has used in there. So I'm optimistic that the operational use of the National Guard is a good thing.
Yeah. Thank you. I tend to agree with that assessment. General Waldhauser, tragically, practically every day, it seems, we hear about various tragedies around the world attributed to the work of terrorists, whether the horrific news of what happened in Orlando, Florida on June 12th, or the violence at Boko Haram that seems incessant in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Niger. What do you believe are the actual threats to our national security interests emanating from Africa, and how will you work to differentiate between actual threats to our national security and unfortunate situations that all too often happen on that continent, but perhaps could be said realistically not to have a direct impact on our national security?
Senator, it's important for our national security interests that we have a secure, a safe, and a prosperous Africa. So, for example, although Boko Haram would be considered, in my view, a regional threat, just like AQIM in Mali, they have shown signs of going after Western interests in other countries in the western part of Africa. So, for example, on the Ivory Coast this past summer, shooting up of about a dozen or so people who are on the beach, the hotel inside Mali. So they do go and try to make spectacular attacks where Western interests are on the continent, because their objective, certainly Boko Haram's objective, is to have their own state inside Nigeria. So the bottom line is, it's important for us to disrupt those activities, to make sure we contain those in the countries they're on, so they don't spread throughout the continent, don't spread, for example, from Libya up into the Mediterranean, into southern Europe, and ultimately don't spread to our homeland. We have a significant interest in making sure we keep it that way.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.